We have the largest, most structurally overbuilt gasoline engine that GM currently makes in any of their pickup trucks, and today we're going to see just how good, or more likely just how bad, this engine is when it comes to fuel economy, baby. Welcome back, I'm Alex. We got another chilly fall day here. The snow should be flying any day now, and we have another HD gasser engine with us. You guys seem to love these fuel economy loops with these HD gasser engines. So, well, with this 6.6 liter, the L8T, it kind of makes it the trifecta because we have run the 6.4 liter HEMI as well as the 7.3 liter Godzilla on my fuel economy loops. So I'm excited to see how this engine stacks up in comparison to the competition. This 6.6 liter engine, which is a little bit of an old school design, a push rod, 2 valves per cylinder, V8 engine, cast iron block. As I mentioned, one of the most structurally overbuilt engines that GM currently produces. It's a tried and true design known for its durability, power, and performance. Fuel economy, however, not so much. Under the hood, this thing is putting out 401 horsepower, 464 pound-feet of torque. Not gonna probably win that many drag races, but plenty of real-world power out of the slower revving, somewhat detuned, big displacement V8 engine. And in terms of real-world fuel economy, what we could expect, looking on the forums and what other people have said, it's not looking good. Why would I be looking on forums for fuel economy? Well, once again, this is an HD gas engine, meaning that we don't actually have any official EPA fuel economy ratings. So there's always a little bit of guesswork with these HD gas engines, but if I had to guess, I would say 15, 16 miles per gallon, just seeing how the other HD gas engines did on my fuel economy loop. Speaking of my fuel economy loop, it is an 85-mile journey. We go city, country, and highway, 3 sections to ideally give us a good combined fuel economy score. So let's get this beast to the gas station and fill her up with some fuel. I'll see you there. Now that right there, classic Duramax cat eye right there. God, I love those trucks. They made great trucks back in the mid-2000s. But this 6.6 liter should mimic and is designed based upon a lot of those early 2000 GM V8 engines, which were phenomenal. I honestly think one of my top engines I'd love to have is like an 06 LBZ Duramax, but they are hard to find, especially up here that are not rusted to freaking dust. All right, we're full of fuel, reset our trip gauge, and first up, the city. You guys probably know the drill by now, but in the city, I try and keep the truck around 35 miles an hour, traffic depending, stoplight depending. And well, despite this engine being hailed as a old school pushrod V8 engine, which is not wrong, there are a couple of modern touches to this engine which could certainly improve our fuel economy, especially in the city. But before we go down that road, we do need to remember that up front here, we have a rather large displacement V8 engine in a heavy pickup truck. And in the city, lots of stopping and starting. This is just not going to be a very efficient vehicle package. And that's just the bottom line. If you're gonna be spending a lot of time in the city with this engine, it might cost you an arm and a leg. And I know firsthand with my own Ram 2500 with a 6.4 liter HEMI, these HD gas engines, they don't play nice in the city when it comes to fuel economy. But this engine does have a couple of tricks up its sleeve, as I mentioned. First of all, we have a variable displacement oil pump in this engine, or on this engine, and that could save us anywhere from 1 to 2 to maybe even 3% fuel economy savings. Essentially what's gonna happen is when we're at slower speeds or lower RPMs, maybe even idling along in the city here, the engine is going to say we don't need as much oil flow, so it's not going to flow as much oil from our oil pump, and that should save some fuel economy. Another advantage of this engine is using direct injection. So this engine sprays fuel directly into the combustion chamber, and that's going to allow for a lot more precise fuel control. Every drop of fuel is going to be accounted for, meaning that our air-fuel mixtures are just going to be even more spot on, which should save us a little bit of fuel economy in comparison to port injection gasoline engines, which the 7.3 Godzilla as well as the 6.4 HEMI utilize. We also have the highest compression ratio on the HD gasoline segment, tied with the 6.8 liter mini Godzilla at 10.8 to 1, and that's going to allow this engine to have a better thermal efficiency, meaning that we're just not going to need to use as much fuel to do the same work. Again, should help save this engine a couple of drops of fuel, especially in the city. And lastly, folks, this engine uses variable valve timing. We have a single in-block camshaft that uses a hydraulic solenoid to help either shift the camshaft to advance or retard the engine timing depending on driving conditions. So yes, GM did turn back the clock a little bit with this cast iron, big displacement, push rod V8 engine, but make no mistake, this is not your 454 carbed big block from the 80s. There is still quite a few modern touches on this L8T V8 engine, and that should help us save some fuel on our fuel economy run today. So as we leave the city here, we're sitting at 14.7 miles per gallon, just a hair under that Godzilla. Honestly, not bad. I'll take that. I expected this L8T to be actually worse than the HEMI, closer to 10 miles per gallon, but at almost 15 miles per gallon, encroaching on this Duramax, at least in the city, I'll take that all day long. Now, granted, guys, I am absolutely feathering the pedal, being extremely conservative. So if you are not being that conservative and just driving quote unquote normally, I would assume this probably goes down, but that's what I do with every truck on the fuel economy loop. We're now in our country section where I put the truck in cruise control at 56 miles an hour or 90 kilometers an hour. And after seeing these HD gas engines typically get crushed in the city for fuel economy, on this section we start to see these bigger displacement engines sort of stretch their legs a little bit, and we get a little bit better fuel economy, which is always exciting. And it does make some sense because these HD gasser engines, for the most part, are very similarly designed with the intention of good low-end grunt as well as a very broad torque band, which is what makes these engines just such great workhorses. And because of that, it's going to allow this engine to sit back at nice low RPMs as we go over these hills here and just rely and sit back on that big displacement to push us through. We don't need to downshift as frequently, and we're not going to be pushing boost into the engine because we don't need turbos when we have cubic inches. I literally couldn't ask for a more perfect fall day for a little bit of a drive in the country. But to prove my own point in terms of these engines all sort of being similar, the peak torque of this engine is made at 4,000 RPM. The peak torque of the 7.3 Godzilla is made at 4,000 RPM. The peak torque of the 6.4 liter HEMI is made at 4,000 RPM. All very similar torque bands as well as power delivery out of those engines. Another thing that's actually very similar with all of those engines is driveline. It wouldn't be Getty's Garage if we didn't go over the driveline, because as my regular viewers know, all that torque and power has to go through our driveline to get those wheels turning. And well, just like our peak torque figures, as I mentioned, the drivelines of all three HD gassers I've tested are extremely similar. Starting with our axle ratio, we get an axle ratio of 373 to 1, and that is the exact same axle ratio on the Ford as well as the 6.4 HEMI I tested. And that should make for a very, very nice comparison. And I think it goes to show that Ford, GM, Ram, they're all sort of going after the same thing with their HD gasser engines. Normally I like to nitpick the heck out of each truck and engine, but when it comes to an axle ratio of 373s, I can't complain. I think it's a great axle ratio for an HD truck. Gets some fuel economy benefits, what we're looking for today, but also 373 is a great torque multiplying ratio. So if you are towing something, you shouldn't have a problem. Moving up our driveline with this 2500 HD, we get the 10-speed Allison transmission, as you guys can see right there. With the F250 also coming with a 10-speed transmission, there really isn't much advantage, but with the Ram only coming with an 8-speed transmission behind the 6.4 HEMI, there certainly could be and probably is a fuel economy advantage in this driveline. Now, there is also the strength aspect because we get the 10-speed Allison transmission that comes in behind the Duramax as well, right? Wrong. The 8LT does seem to come with a different variant of the 10-speed Allison transmission, a lighter duty variant with a slightly lower torque rating, as well as some lighter duty internals, whereas the 10-speed that comes behind the Duramax has a much higher torque rating, right around that 1,000 pound-feet. So just keep in mind that 10-speed Allison badge is still technically correct, but you aren't getting the same transmission as the Duramax diesel. So we do have a pretty favorable driveline, at least when it comes to the HD truck world, for fuel economy. But I gotta be honest, I did think that this 6.6 liter was going to be our least fuel efficient engine. I just had a hunch, and so far that's not really been the case. Now granted, this is just what the computer says. As we always do, we'll hand calculate the final result, but so far it's sticking right in the middle of the pack between the Godzilla and the 6.4 HEMI, so we'll see what happens. One thing I love about a bigger displacement V8 engine is it's just such a smooth driving experience. You get plenty of power, and the truck can just cruise at these higher speeds. Well, we're just leaving the country section, sitting at 15.8 miles per gallon, which is honestly not terrible. Right in between the Godzilla and the HEMI, and I'll take that all day long. I was chatting with one of my buddies, and we were just talking about if you could get a reliable engine like this 6.6 liter and get around 15 miles per gallon, you really can't complain. Because yes, some of the more modern, quote-unquote, lighter duty engines in the 1500s are certainly going to be much more fuel efficient, but are they going to last as long? It's kind of the saying, pay me now or pay me later. So we'll gingerly make our way onto our highway section here. This is where we put the truck back in cruise control to 70 miles an hour, good highway speed. And typically the larger displacement V8 engines have had some success in terms of fuel economy on this highway section. Again, I'd be happy if we stick right where we are, 15.7 miles per gallon. I'd have no complaints with this engine. But here's a question. I'm curious, how many of you guys would be open to the idea of stepping up from a 1500 to a 2500 with an HD gasser, sacrificing a good chunk of fuel economy, but knowing you're getting a more durable, more reliable, longer lasting, simpler engine in the truck? Because a lot of the 1500 engines are just not built like they used to be, and you're often sacrificing efficiency for lighter duty internals, and that could potentially lead to less reliable, shorter life engines. It's an interesting conversation. There's also the question of how much longer engines like this are still going to be available to purchase. Living up here in beautiful Canada, apparently by 2035, internal combustion engines will not be able to be sold in this country at all. And that's like 9 years away. So as I've pointed out in a number of my videos, these HD gas engines like this 6.6 liter are some of the last durable, strong-built V8 gas engines that you can actually buy. Well, as we're about to jump off the highway, we're currently sitting at 16.2 miles per gallon. That is the most fuel-efficient highway run we have seen so far with these HD gasser engines. Again, I was not expecting this. I was expecting this engine to be a little bit of a guzzler on the fuel, and we are not seeing that at all. We made it to the gas station. That is our final rating right there, 16.3 miles per gallon. We'll see if that holds up. All right, so that was our first bump there. We'll wait 30 seconds. Look at that, this truck's even ready for a fifth wheel here. It's a nice truck. It's honestly a nice truck, back rack. Anyways, 3, 2, 1. That seems like a lot of fuel. We'll see. The computers on these trucks tend not to be perfect, and this one was no different. We finished with 15.5 miles per gallon. Still very respectable, although it is on the lower side of things against the other HD gas engines we've compared, but not by much. All in all, I think all three engines are all sort of within the same ballpark, if I'm going to be honest. I think at the end of the day, with these big displacement V8 engines in these heavy 2500 HD trucks, If you're getting anywhere close to 15 miles per gallon, you really can't complain because you are getting some durability, longevity, as well as some reliability in place of better fuel economy. And to me, I think that is a good trade-off. Let me know what you guys think. If you own one of these 6.6 liter L8T gassers, what kind of fuel mileage are you seeing, and are you disappointed, or are you okay with it? Always like hearing from real world owners. If you did like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up, and if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to have you on board. Anyways, enough of me. We'll see you in the next freaking video.